All right. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be a video on deep sleepers and breakouts. It's going to be mostly a strategy video. If you're not into that type of thing, yeah. Anyway, I had a comment about like not any crazy breakouts like Puka this year, and that's not a simple question to answer. There's going to be a lot of story time in this video. So again, if you're not into like theory and strategy and story time, like yeah, okay. Anyway, in this case, like the story, a little bit of the story behind the channel is like one of my co-managers, he's like, hey, think you kind of know fantasy football stuff, let's try and make this money off this. And he got me the streaming site like StreamYards, and he's like, you'll just document like your process of trying to win our league, because I do pretty well at fantasy football. That's just basically how I got into it. So basically all I'm trying to do is record my process and get ready for managing the two teams that I'm in. I've been in more leagues than just the two, but I find that like I just generally don't get invested in some of the leagues, and the two leagues that I'm in, like I want to win them. And that's the long and short of it. Like some of the other leagues I've won and been like, hey, that's great, I've won money, but I like embarrassing some of my league mates, and that's just how it goes. I enjoy that. Anyway, so internet fantasy football guy can just say a whole bunch of names and numbers and see what sticks, and everybody's like, oh yeah, like what you're talking about. It's you're looking for specific things that like make sense. Like I've talked about this before with storytelling. Like still tell the story about how guys you'll get to where they need to get to from a fantasy perspective. I'm trying to win my leagues, and like you can run your teams the way that you want. And I'll get there how I get there in my leagues. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes. Fantasy strategy is pretty much about learning from last year's mistakes and correcting them, and then not overreacting to last year's mistakes. In this case, everybody's overreacting to Puka and Kyron Williams and Nico and those guys. Like they're overreacting. That's why it's not that simple to go out and find like those crazy breakouts like Puka. I already said that Puka's probably not going to happen again. But we talked about like 2020 with like James Robinson. I can bring him up because I'm going to talk about James Robinson. So I landed James Robinson in 2020. And I did it before the start of the season because I just basically dropped my 13th round draft pick and was like, I'll pick up James Robinson. And it was based off of like one thing, very unclear backfield with the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2020. One of the other running backs said like James Robinson is like the best running back that we have. And, unclear backfield. The other guys in my league, it's a really competitive league. They went and picked up the other guys on the Jacksonville Jaguars offense, the roster. And James Robinson, undrafted free agent, no one knew about him, and I was like, okay, well, he may be the best running back. I'll just pick him up week one and find out. And he did 16 for 62 and 1 for 28, and I didn't play him week two, and he went off for 19.5, and then he was in my lineup after that. That's just how it goes sometimes. That's like the easy way to look at it is go like, well, can I tell the story about how a guy gets on the field, he gets that opportunity, and then we'll find out what he does with it once he gets on the field. That's how even going back to like after waivers, how I track these guys, like playing Stephon Diggs for the first time when he broke out, and everybody in my league looking at me like I was crazy. Like tracking guys, like their snap counts and their opportunities, like that's the easiest way to do it, because if it doesn't matter how good they are if they're on the sideline. And that's just how I generally look at it. So trying to track this year's crazy breakout like a Puka, like there are guys I'm tracking, and this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. These breakouts that are there every year, everybody's prices this year have been driven up because of the fact that everybody's trying to find this year's Puka. They're trying to find this year's Kyron Williams or Nico or Sam Laporta. And we'll talk about those guys here in a second. But the main thing behind it is those prices have been driven up. So like they're a little bit harder to find. But from a fantasy football perspective, we're in the middle of preseason training camp. There are going to be suspensions, cuts, trades, and injuries. And that's the main thing behind telling the story about our good buddy Puka. And I can bring him up right here. How Puka came about last year for me is they had a vacated opportunity with Robert Woods being gone. And so I was just like, well, who's the most likely guy to fill in that role? Well, it's Puka because he's good at football. That's just generally how I was looking at it. So I'm like, I got a 13th round draft pick. He's going to be like Bobby Trees. I'm like, okay, this is worth it to throw my dart at Puka. The other thing that happened, which really like why I made the video on Puka last year, is Cooper Kupp when he went down with that hamstring injury. And I remember like texting my league mate, like, do not draft Cooper Kupp. I don't care what the price was. Don't go out and get him. And I was like, go get Puka. And he was like, who's Puka? And I'm like, don't worry about it. We're going to get Puka. And I think I talked about this before in the strategy in that auction league, because I got him also in my snake draft league. But in my auction league with Puka, I was like, don't bring him up. If he doesn't come up, don't bring him up. I don't want to draft him, because in an auction league, if you put a $2 bid on or a $1 bid on a guy, someone else can just go like, I'll take that guy for $2. So if you're running out of money at the end of your draft, a guy like Puka could end up going for like $3-4, because other guys will be like, I don't even know who this guy is. I'm just not going to let you have him. And that was what I was more worried about in that hyper competitive main money auction league, is that somebody's going to like, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm not going to let you have him for free. And that's what I was more worried about with Puka in that league. So in that case, because of the Cooper Kupp injury, it was like, well, not only do we have a vacated number 2 slot for the Rams, we have a vacated number 1 spot for the Rams. And there's a couple other things to look at from a story perspective about why we're looking for these crazy breakouts from a fantasy perspective. The Rams the year before, in 2021, they were the 2022 Rams. They were the defending Super Bowl champion, and everybody thought they were going to be good, chasing good offenses. That that's a good rule of thumb in fantasy football. But they weren't good in 2022. They were actually pretty bad. Cooper Kupp gets injured, Matt Stafford gets injured. The Rams were bad. Going into 2023, the Rams were projected to not be a very good football team. But if we're tracking certain things, like Matt Stafford didn't magically get bad at football. They weren't going to be necessarily bad. They weren't necessarily going to be good, but they weren't necessarily going to be bad. So in this case, it's like, well, I got a good quarterback attached to what may be a better offense. Again, talking about some of the other things that we can predict is the Rams had a bad offensive line in 2022. They tried to upgrade the offensive line in 2023. Again, we can't always guess right on those things, but we can kind of guess maybe that they tried to address the position. So there's a lot of things that I was looking at when it goes like, well, what could Puka be? Well, he could be Bobby Trees, the patron saint of fantasy football. He could be that guy. But the moment that like Cooper Kupp went down, I'm like, well, I could get a guy that's gonna get like 10 or 12 targets a game. Now, I will tell you, I didn't even have the guts to play Puka last year in week 1. I should have done it. I knew I should have done it. My co-manager got upset at me, both of them, because they were like, why didn't you play this guy? You knew, why didn't you play him? And like, because I don't even have the guts to say he was gonna get like whatever he got, like the 15 targets that he had week 1. Like, I didn't even predict that. But I can at least tell the story, the road about how a guy like him gets to where he's going to get to. And that's the main thing about like, well, why haven't there been any like stories about any like crazy breakouts, like any videos about crazy breakouts like Puka? Because there just haven't been the injuries. There haven't been the trades. There haven't been like the camp moves that say that this guy's going to be the guy. Like if I thought that guy was going to exist, I would tell him. But the other thing is, some of these guys that I would be able to make the videos about, like people are already tracking them. Everybody's already talking about Jalen Polk. They're already talking about like Lad McConkey. And I can bring up this one right here. Like these are the guys that would have been this year's Puka, but they're not this year's Puka because people are overreacting to Kyron Williams, Nico, Sam Laporta, those type of guys. So like Lad McConkey, yeah, he's this year's Puka. Jalen Polk or Javon Baker for the Patriots, they're going to be this year's Puka. They're already within draftability. Lad McConkey is going to be basically like a 9th, 10th round draft pick in a lot of your leagues. He may end up going higher. I talk about like Jonathan Brooks, like someone going up like into the 6th round of a draft to go get Jonathan Brooks in a mock draft that I did. Like Lad McConkey could end up going higher, except for the fact that like the Justin Herbert injury, like may keep him a little bit depressed, which is good. I like that. Jalen Polk and Javon Baker are supposed to be attached to a bad offense with offensive line problems. Sounds a little bit like that Rams team in 2020, what was projected to be 2023, right? So like these are the things that we're looking at. Like Brian Thomas, I am tracking him to be like one of those crazy breakouts. I mean, and one of the rules of thumb, going after rookie wide receivers is a good way to find crazy breakouts. But with Brian Thomas Jr., like little different road because he could end up being the number 4 in the offense and he could end up being the number 1 in the offense. And he may not even end up being like somewhere in between, like it may or may not. So it's going to be a different thing than like Lad McConkey that I can just say like right now projects to be the number 1 in that offense. And Jalen Polk probably projects to be the number 1, even though, as I hit the wrong button again, Javon Baker could end up actually being that guy, and they played tonight, and I haven't really watched anything outside the box scores. Javon Baker, I think had like 1 for 12, and Jalen Polk was like 2 for 6 or something like that. But I haven't watched anything on that, so I don't really want to talk about it too much. Uh, Rome is another one that we could talk about. Like he could end up just being the number one in that offense. So again, these are the easy layup ones. Like internet man does not have to tell you like, hey, the breakouts. And then with Ricky Pearsall, if we hear that trade with Brandon Ayuk, like, yeah, okay, he's gonna jump. And I have this pulled up, and this is just me marking it up before I go live. But in general speaking, like you want to talk about like the crazy breakouts, like Puka. Puka was going undrafted, like not on anybody's radar except for like a handful of people. In this case, like you're talking about like a guy that's going so late in the draft, that's going undrafted, that's going to break out, and the handful of guys, they've already been driven up in price because of the fact that everybody knew like, oh look, Puka happened. Well, what happened back in 2020 with James Robinson? That was the question. Well, who's this year's James Robinson? Like, trying to overreact to the correct moves coming out of the previous season. And that was what was going on with James Robinson. James Robinson, well, is there going to be a rookie undrafted running back that ends up finishing, 7 overall in fantasy? The question back in like 2021 was like probably never going to be another James Robinson, undrafted rookie free agent that finishes as top 10 running back like for free in this case. So the same thing, like, well, who's going to be this year's Puka? Well, like, 5th round draft pick that goes undrafted in fantasy that ends up finishing as wide receiver 4. Like, is that going to happen in fantasy this year? Maybe, but we probably don't have enough information to be making videos about that guy, outside of, I want internet clicks. So not going to necessarily be that type of video if you're into that, but I am tracking a lot of guys and seeing how, like, we're not even week 2 of the preseason. We still have week 3, and then we're going to have like roster cuts, and roster cuts are going to tell us a lot if those trades and some of those injuries that like we're expecting to happen. And there's already some injuries. They're just, not the right injuries, all that stuff about like, like we don't want guys to get hurt. Yeah, it's fantasy. So in this case, the other guys, and I'll just tell this right now, the guys that I'm tracking that I already said, I told you so about, like Jordan Whittington, 6th round draft pick by the Rams. Like, he would be this year's Puka, surprisingly. Unsurprisingly, he's part of the Rams. If there wasn't for the fact that, you're looking at Demarcus Robinson being the number 3 right now. It would be Jordan Whittington. He went 6 for 9 in 74 in the first preseason game. And again, preseason doesn't matter, but they like him. He's a converted running back and he blocks. And that's the biggest thing. Like, so next year, and again, this doesn't help you win your redraft leagues this year, but next year, like Jordan Whittington, like, yeah, he's going to be Puka. The other guy to talk about, like, well, who's this going to be this year's like crazy breakout? Jalen Naylor right now for the Vikings. He projects to be the number 2 if Jordan Addison gets suspended. And with TJ Hawkinson, like, basically not starting the season, healthy. Yeah. I'm not looking necessarily to find this year's like, wide receiver 4 or running back 7. Like, those guys are very difficult to predict. What I can say is like the Vikings are going to throw the football all over the schoolyard. The only other guy to throw the football to right now is probably going to be Jalen Naylor. And, if we're talking about like Chuba Hubbard giving you like, 3 to 4 good weeks from a fantasy perspective, like, who's this year's James Robinson? Chuba Hubbard. Who's this year's Puka? Yeah, it may end up being Jalen Naylor right now, but we're waiting on that suspension that should be coming down the pipe with Jordan Addison. And that looks like, from what I've heard, it's going to be about 3 weeks when that occurs. So if that occurs, hey, you want like, 6 to 10 targets for the first 3 weeks of the season. If Jordan Addison goes down with his suspension, yeah, it's going to be Jalen Naylor. But again, it doesn't matter, horseshoes and hand grenades, until Jordan Addison actually gets suspended. And then it's like, well, do you have the guts to roll Jalen Naylor out week 1? Well, I didn't have the guts to roll James Robinson, and I didn't have the guts to roll out Puka. And I predict these guys like, pretty regularly. That's why my buddy went out and got me a YouTube channel. All right. So moving on, already talked about these guys. We'll move on to this next guys. So Josh Downs, and this is like why I haven't put out videos about like certain crazy breakouts, because I'm waiting on good information, not just like making stuff up to fill content. And the question today was like awesome. I was like, okay, now I'm excited to do a video. I say Josh Downs goes down with that high ankle sprain. So like, who knows how long he's going to be out. And then you have like Adonai Mitchell, like, athletic freak who drops in the draft. And in this case, like, you're not buying anything more than a wide receiver 3 right now when it comes to Adonai Mitchell. But, and here's the but, like, is he going to be able to take over the offense? And at this point, and this is why I have like this pulled up. And then again, this is just for visualization. It's not like, hey, you should listen to ESPN. It's just like pretty to look at. But in this case, if you're in a 10-man league and you're basically going to do like, more of your traditional league where it's like 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a flex, a tight end, and then you have like your kicker, your punter. So you have like those 9 slots in your lineup. And then like my 2 leagues that I'm in, like there's six bench spots in those leagues. So when I talk about like 13th round draft pick, that's like my last round draft pick, because I don't pick up my kickers and I don't pick up my defenses until 14th round 14 and 15. In my main money league, you have to walk out with a valid lineup. That means I have to pull the trigger on a kicker and a defense in round 14 and 15. In my high school league, because it's more of a casual league, they ain't no rules on that. I'm pulling more guys round 15, round 14, round 15. I'm still picking up guys. I'll deal with defense and kicker later on, like 15 minutes before the start of the season. I'll go pick those guys up because I'm putting more guys in my cart because I'm still waiting on information to find out until like the very last second. Now, in my main money league, depending on who my kicker and my defense end up being in those leagues, like I will probably end up immediately dropping those 2 guys and stashing 2 other guys on my bench until the last minute. Like I'm sneaky, I'm evil, I'm trying to win my league. Hey, that's just how I run things. Now, in this case, in both my leagues, like so the top 130 guys, those are draftable guys. And when I look at some of these guys that are out there, like an Adam Thielen, absolutely positively no way he's going to win anybody any leagues this year. He's like 34, attached to what is projected to not be a good offense. I don't know why he's draftable. If you're rolling out Adam Thielen in a 10-man league, like I don't know what you're doing. So in this case, like I can look at some of the other guys that are out there, like an Andre Yosivas attached to the Bengals, and go like, Yosivas has a better road to win me a league, and he's at like 274 on ESPN. Now on Fantasy Pros, I don't know exactly where some of these guys are, but Chuba Hubbard, he's going 131. So in my 10-man league, if people are following like the Fantasy Pros rankings, Chuba Hubbard's not going drafted. He would be, hey, you want to know who's going to win you weeks for like weeks 3 through 4 before Jonathan Brooks comes back. It's going to be Chuba Hubbard. I don't know why he would be ranked outside of draftability. And then you can go over like on your ESPNs and you can go find like Chuba Hubbard's going 115. He's going within draftability. So again, know your league, know your personality of your league makes, like what rankings they're most likely to use. My main money league, I think, moved back to ESPN from Sleeper. So like again, like this is going to make a big deal during the auction that's going to be like digital, because like they're going to be going right down the line of best available, and it's hard to not have that influence you psychologically when you're looking at something of what you would perceive as authority telling you how to draft something. So in this case, like that would be what's going on. And all these guys, it doesn't really matter why I have them colored the way that they're colored, because some of these guys are going to be breakout guys within late round drafts, like pick 100 to pick 130. These are going to be like potential breakout guys that I just have listed so I can remember to talk about them if I want to. In this case, with these guys, they some of these guys have been moved up higher than what they would go in other league or years, because of the fact that everybody's trying to find this year's Kyron Williams and this year's Puka and this year's Nico and this year's Sam Laporta. Some of the guys haven't been actually moved up because of that reason. And you're looking at like your Ben Sinnott, like who had a pretty good week 1 when it comes to fantasy football or the preseason, like he hasn't been moved up on ESPN. Now, some of your snob leagues earlier in the offseason, like your best ball leagues, Ben Sinnott was being drafted within a particular range, because everybody was already predicting like, oh, he's going to be this year's Sam Laporta. Like it could happen. It could be a breakout, could be a sleeper. I'm still waiting to find out. Does he have that road? Is he draftable? Probably fringe draftability. So like on ESPN, he's going 289. Yeah, depending on how competitive your league is, like, yeah, he should be drafted. If you're not in a very competitive league, yeah, you probably don't need to be drafting him. You can knife fight for him week 1. Now, I bring this up with like your Ben Snotts because, again, know your league. I may actually end up with Sam Darnold as my starting quarterback in my main money league, because those guys are vicious, and Sam Darnold's going to cost me like $1. As opposed to some of these other guys, and I've talked about this before, like I could definitely see like a Jaden Daniels in my main money league going for like $15-20, because just the opportunity to win a league with a guy it's worth that like $10-15-$20 to some of these guys, because you miss on some of those picks in these competitive leagues, like you ain't winning. If you don't put a Rico Dowdle on the bottom of your bench, like that 13th round draft pick, and he ends up being the man from like a breakout perspective, that crazy breakout, Rico Dowdle 196 on ESPN. Like there is that story to tell where like old man Zeke, $2 million contract, Rico Dowdle is just the man attached to a good offense. Like I don't know about you, but he's on that short list of guys that like has to be within my top 30, 130 of my main money 10-man league. Now, my high school league's 12-man, and that's why I have like some of these marked up. That's like 156. Like, so you're looking at like your Ray Davises, your Khalil Herberts, your Romeo Dobbs, all these guys would be in those ranges. And like Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, like Pop Douglas, maybe Antonio Gibson, Kendre Miller, like some of these guys like would just not, they shouldn't even be within draftability of some of your leagues. So like I have some of these marked up. You're looking at 208 when it comes to like a 16-man league, if you're into that type of thing. And then like 182 if you're into a 14-man league. Like these are the ranges of guys that like should be all the way pushed up because your defense and your kick gets go later. So like crazy sleeper breakouts. Like this is why I can hit on a Puka. I can hit on a James Robinson. You know, like some of those guys when like other people are going in different directions. Like I get them every single year. That's why I could talk about like saying like rounds, 5 or excuse me, 6 and 7, like maybe, but like, after round 7, like I just let my hair down and I just go stack these guys on the bottom of my bench. Like that's why I can go pick them up. Now, my co-manager, my main money league, he will tell you flat out that like rounds or picks like 1 to 50, like, yeah, maybe you don't need to be listening to me on those guys. Not the greatest track record on going after upside with those picks, but after that, it doesn't matter. It's just a coin flip, and I can just go like put a whole bunch of them in my cart, and I could be like all the other internet like fantasy football guys, and I can just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. And that's generally after I go after some of these guys, because if they can't tell me the story about how they're going to be the number one in their offense, whether that's a running back or a wide receiver, like just gone. If they're a tight end and they can't be the number 1 or number 2 in their offense, they're gone. Like why would I draft them in the first place? So that's what makes it really easy after how I go after these guys. And I can just generally look at some of these guys and go like, well, can I tell that story? So when I start talking about like breaking these guys, like an Adonai Mitchell, like you're not looking to get your league winner when you go after Adonai Mitchell. You're looking to go after your Bobby Trees, your solid wide receiver 2 that you're getting outside of wide receiver 2 range. And from a fantasy football perspective, like trying to find out like where these guys are going in their draft. If they're not going within the range of like the non-defensive, non-kickers in your league, like those would be the points where like, if you like Adonai Mitchell to be that guy, like he should be your 13th round draft pick, and just go up and get him. Like, the guys that know what you're drafting. Know who are the guys that you're going to hang your hat on and you're going to go up and get. So in this case, and I talked about this before, if you're kind of new to the channel, like I probably will be walking out of my drafts with Lad McConkey, and I probably will be walking out of my drafts with Jalen Polk. And that's going to change my draft strategy earlier on in the draft, because I know I have 2 guys, like 2 wide receivers that I'm going to probably be stashing late in the draft, because I'm not really tracking any running backs that are going to have league winning upside. Now, some of these other guys, like I'm going to have to make that business decision on, like when it comes to like a Brian Thomas Jr., or like if I'm going to go spend on him and Lad at the same time, and that's both leagues. But in general, like these were the guys that I'd be tracking, and they've been slightly elevated in cost because people are worried about like missing out on this year's Nico Collins or this year's Puka. That's why there aren't any really crazy breakouts, because most of the values of guys have already been driven up. And that's why we can go over to ESPN and go like, you remember when we were like not tracking Dontavian Wicks being like 160 overall. So like in your 12-man leagues, Dontavian Wicks should be drafted, right? And he's getting very close to being drafted in 10-man leagues because of some of the other guys that probably should not be drafted because of the lack of a road to win your leagues. In this case, like your Romeo Dobbs, like 152 on ESPN. Yeah, like he's probably should be drafted in 10-man leagues, and he's already moved up there. So again, people are already tracking on these crazy breakouts from last year because they don't want to be that guy that missed out on Nico Collins. They are having an overreaction to missing out on what was pretty obvious last year when it comes to like your Nikos and your Pukas. Now, when it comes to a couple other guys, and I'm rambling away here, but when it comes to a couple other guys that were out there, like your Sam Laportas, like I didn't see that coming, because I was like, well, how is he going to jump the line and be the number 2 in that offense behind the Sun God and Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams? Like I didn't see it occurring, and it occurred. And that's just going after draft capital and good athletic measurables. Some guys are just good at football, and they're going to use them that way. Now, the other guy that I was right on, but I screwed myself out of, was Devon Achane. And it's just like good at football, going to a good offense, bad situation. I just didn't hang on to him long enough. So in this case, like there are certain guys that are just like, hey, I got to go out and get them. I'm going to tell myself that story, and I can go out and I can predict these guys. Now, with Nico, how I predicted Nico last year was just an easy road of saying, hey, who's going to be the number one in this offense? It's probably going to be Nico. I didn't think the offense was going to be good. I didn't think CJ Stroud was necessarily good at football, but that's why I still go out and I draft these guys, because I can tell the story about how they get there. So everybody out there that's telling the story about like, well, the Chargers are going to be slow and they're going to be like, they're not going to throw the football enough. It doesn't matter. If they're efficient, they don't have to throw the football a lot. They just need to be efficient. When it comes to like Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, the Patriots aren't going to throw the football a lot. Doesn't matter. Like we could have predicted that some of these teams that we thought were going to be bad are going to be good. We're talking about like Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Rams last year. The Rams were not supposed to be good, and then they end up going like 12-5, and they're a pretty good offense. So again, that's not a good enough explanation to not go out and draft the guys that project to be the number ones in their offenses, because it just becomes an issue of price. And who are you passing on to go out and get like a Javon Baker or Jalen Polk at like 130? And at this point, these guys, because everybody's concerned with missing out on this year's Puka, have already been moved up into draftability. So like 140 Jalen Polk absolutely should be drafted even in 10-man leagues. Like that's just the easy way to go. If you have like pick 130, it should be Jalen Polk. There's very few guys that are going to be able to theoretically be able to walk you into that like 120 to 150 target range. And Jalen Polk has that story. Now, it could be Javon Baker. You like Javon Baker, go out and draft your Javon Bakers, because I don't know which one of them, of the two guys it's going to be. And it could be neither, but it doesn't matter because it's going to cost me nothing to find out. And that's how I'm able to be right on your Pukas and be right on your James Robinson, because I'm not right on that particular guy every year. I'm right on one of those guys that I stash on the bottom of my court later in drafts, because other guys don't have the ability to win me leagues. Now, Kyren Williams, the equal and opposite reaction, the overreaction to Kyren Williams means certain guys have already been had their prices jumped way up here. And you're talking about like your J.K. Dobbins, like 113 attached to the Chargers. No one knows who's going to be the starting running back for the Chargers. If it's going to be a running back by committee, no one knows. But a guy coming off a torn Achilles and a torn ACL would normally not be going like 113 overall. But everybody's concerned because we ended up looking foolish because the tea leaves and the beat writers said Kyren Williams is going to be the guy attached to the Rams offense. So like crazy breakout, maybe it's J.K. Dobbins. If you like J.K. Dobbins, go draft J.K. Dobbins. Now, is there anything saying that J.K. Dobbins is going to be the guy? Not really. Is there anything saying he's not going to be the guy? Also not really. So again, probably not a bad guy to be throwing at the bottom of your cart. He would normally not be drafted in most of your leagues, but because of Kyren Williams last year, he is. All right. So Sam Laporta, I already talked about him. The other thing, like Raheem Mostert, who was going pretty much close to not draftable last year. Again, this is just another thing where it's like, well, getting pieces of projected good offenses with murky backfields. So again, that's just how it goes. I missed out on Raheem Mostert because I put my eggs in the basket of Devin Achane and they both paid off. So again, that's just how it goes sometimes. All right. So I already talked about Sam Darnold as being a guy that like I'm just right now projecting to be the guy I'm going to pull the trigger on for $1 in my main money league. And he may end up being the guy I go after in my 12-man league just because I'm going to fade the quarterback position because I know I got him. High volume passing offense attached or with good nimbly bimbly. And he could be Bob's your uncle when it comes to like some of these guys. So that makes it easy. Now, stuff that I'm listening to in camp to try and go like, well, who's going to be the crazy breakout? Well, we can tell that story with Jalen McMillan, the 3rd round draft pick for the Buccaneers. The offense, well, we can say it's going to be somewhere in that like not good to not bad range. The main thing behind this is like you got Mike Evans over the age apex, and you got Chris Godwin that like may have lost a step when it comes to football. So now if we're trying to project a guy who's going to have the ability to break out, it's going to be Jalen McMillan. And at this point in camp, like he is going to project to be a wide receiver 3. Wide receiver 3s grow on trees. Now, if we hear the right news, or you're in a deep enough league where you could stash a guy like this, could he end up being the guy that ends up like leading the team in targets? Absolutely. So right now, like, when it comes to like, is there going to be a crazy breakout? Is it going to be Jalen McMillan? I don't know. That's why I'm not talking about him, because there's no point on going like, I'm going to throw shit on a wall and hope it sticks. Now, Ben Sinnott, on the other hand, going after a guy that projects to maybe be the number 2 in the offense, the more that I hear that like, he's being used in particular ways, like, yeah, he's going to move up into that dart throw range when it comes to like trying to get yourself out of the tight end wasteland. And, and if for when it comes to going after like this year, Sam Laporta, like pick 130. Now, some of your leagues, and again, know your leagues. These are guys that like, it's not a bad idea to knife fight after week 1 with. So like when I start breaking down after waivers, after week 1, like we're looking at like snap shares and whether or not it's good to stash those guys now to predict your Trey McBride. So again, those tea leaves on certain things like Trey McBride, that was predictable. Why? Because he's a second round draft pick, and then Zach Ertz gets injured, and it's just like, well, stash that guy right now. Like, why wait? Like, the moment this occurs, there's something telling me that I should make this reaction, and if I'm wrong, it costs me nothing. To be able to predict Trey McBride. So that's how you do this in fantasy. Moving on. So right now, other guys that I am tracking, and I'm just not going to do a video on because, hey, is this Jamar Chase situation. I talk about this, like my money league that I am drafting in on Saturday. I will not be drafting Jamar Chase because of the contract situation that's going on. Now, does that mean that I can't take advantage of the Bengals offense? No, because I have my two choices between Andre Yosivas and Jermaine Burton, the third round draft pick. In this case, now this is like Javon Baker and Jalen Polk. I really get to pick my poison. Now, do I think either one of these guys are going to be quote unquote a league winner? No. Can I get a wide receiver 3? Probably. Now, can I get a wide receiver 2? Maybe. Is there still a crazy potential breakout for one of these guys based off the Jamar Chase situation? Yeah. Now, the more we hear about this, the longer this goes on, the more these guys are going to get a little bit more interesting. And then it just becomes an issue of like price shopping. So like 274 Andre Yosivas, like 13th round draft pick, maybe. I'm not going to be pulling that trigger on that right now. But by the time I do my high school league, my snake draft league, yeah, I would potentially be thinking about that if we're still hearing that Jamar Chase isn't practicing. In my auction league, I probably will be stashing at least one of these guys, and they're different. Again, like Yosivas may have been working the slot, and then Burton may end up basically being more of an outside receiver. And again, like the slot versus the outside, it ends up being how productive the targets are and the lower probability targets on top of that. So that's why generally slot players have less value. The wide receiver 3 has less value. And we're looking at like when we're talking about like Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk primarily playing the slot, even if he's a vertical slot versus a guy that can be moved around the formation. And there's a lot of football stuff that I'm just not as interested in when it comes to fantasy football, but it depends on how the offense is going to function. Sometimes the X is just the guy that can get ISO'd and they can just pump targets to. Up on the line of scrimmage, can defeat press, take the top off the defense. A lot of things are happening with football right now is that X can just be, you'll hear about some of the pundits talk about like they just run clear out routes and they're just running vertical clear out routes. They're getting paid to run wind sprints, those type of things. Then the X ends up being like less valuable. But and I remember talking to one of my old football coaches about this. Like when teams play trips and trips really screws with defenses, you have to have multiple trips adjustments that are going out there in football. So if you ISO the X, then a team can just go, I'll give you like, I'll take like 10, 15 targets to the X. But if you double cover the X, and there aren't a lot of teams that run like true double coverage, but if you roll coverage to the X, and then you can just work the overflow when it comes to the 3 receiver side, and you can just take the fact that you have numbers on that side and just you go after those three receivers to that side, and that means that like you may end up with some type of like equal distribution of opportunities to the 3 receiver side. So again, it doesn't actually matter from a fantasy football perspective, like, well, where's the guy going to play? Like, I like guys playing the Z because they can be moved around the formation. If they play the Z, it doesn't mean that they can't play the X or the slot, but that just means that they can be moved around the formation in a way to allow the mismatch to take place. Now, some teams don't necessarily function like that. They're going to be like, the X's are superstar. That's why it doesn't necessarily matter on those cases. But Jermaine Burton hasn't necessarily worked in the slot. He's worked outside. Now, like the idea behind Yosivas and Burton was it would be allowed Jamar Chase to play a little bit more of the slot, which would give him a little bit more volume, which would give him a little bit more value because we generally want volume to go along with higher efficiency in that case. So being able to predict between the two guys, between Burton and Yosivas, like who's going to end up taking over that role of Jamar Chase, like whatever happens with that, like your guess is going to be as good as mine. I probably would be leaning towards Yosivas right now, but Burton ending up playing primarily outside would end up having more week-to-week volume or week-to-week value when it comes to the potential to have those particular weeks that will not give you a 40-degree day. And that's why I go back to like your Jalen Polk and your Javon Baker. If you're trying to win your league, like you're going after Javon Baker and you're hoping he's special. If you're trying to get your Bobby Trees, the patron saints of fantasy football, you're going after Julian Polk. And that's the difference between like Puka, when I was like, well, I'm going to spend a 13th round draft pick to get a wide receiver 2, and Puka, well, I'm going to spend a 13th round draft pick to get Cooper Kupp for the 4 weeks that Cooper Kupp is on IR. That's the difference between your Julian Polk and your Javon Baker. And then when we're looking at like the Bengals, your Jermaine Burton's going to win you a league, as opposed to Yosivas may just be like a nice pick at the rate where he's going when it comes to breakout. And that's all contingent upon what's going on with Jamar Chase and the Bengals. He's not practicing, as far as I just looked it up before I went live. He's still not practicing. So in this case, like, not only would I not be drafting Jamar Chase, I'm going to be going after Yosivas or Burton in the same way that I could potentially predict that, like, maybe going after James Conner the year that Le'Veon Bell held out. That's how I got my James Conner shares, and going like, well, I'll just bet against everybody else. Like, it costs me nothing to be wrong. In this case, if Jamar Chase continues to hold out, like, yeah, I'm drafting a Bengals wide receiver, even a 10-man league, because what do I get? I don't think T. Higgins is good enough to be the quote unquote alpha in the offense. Maybe it's Yosivas. Burton, on the other hand, like, absolutely has the skill set to do that. And that's how I would break that down. Now, right now, because I'm not throwing shit on the wall, I'm not going to do an individual video and go out and draft this guy. We don't have that information yet. It's just stuff that, like, I'm paying attention to. If I knew that, I would do a video and I'd let you guys know how to win your league. Now, the other thing is, like, when we're going after like crazy breakouts, I am still thinking that Dalton Kincaid has the cleanest road to be a unicorn. But in this case, if you don't think that's the case, or someone else snipes you in your league, like if you pick the guy between Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakur, and Curtis Samuel, that's the right guy. Now, you could be wrong on any one of these guys. You could be right on any one of these guys. I would generally be thinking from just a cost standpoint, it still looks like it's going to be Khalil Shakur to be the guy to go after, but that didn't necessarily work out in the first preseason game. So, maybe a little less interested in you're going after Khalil Shakur. Everybody's talking about Keon Coleman. I don't necessarily think Curtis Samuel's going to break out after 7 years in the league, and I would still be going after Dalton Kincaid. But again, are you trying to win your league? Are you going after that league winner? Some of those nice picks, like getting a wide receiver 2 at pick like 130, also going to be a very good way to win your league relative to some of the other things that are going on out there. So, like, picking right when it comes to the Buffalo Bills offense, right now, I don't necessarily think there's a guy. If I thought there was a guy, I'd let you know. But just throwing a dart at one of those guys, and it depends on what your league is, right? So, like, my main money league would not surprise me that like Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakur, and Curtis Samuel all get drafted because of that road to potentially win leagues. It's just easy to be wrong week 1 and throw those guys away. Now, when it comes to the Packers, maybe your best chance to be able to get that like crazy breakout would be Luke Musgrave, because he's tight end, right? So if he's the number 2 attached to this offense, like, you got a league winner. That's just how it goes. Now, I generally think with like Tucker Kraft, that's going to make it a little harder for him. And then the other 2 guys, like, you probably already heard about like Dontavian Wicks, 65-yard touchdown week 1. Preseason doesn't matter. Romeo Doubs looks like he's going to be on the field 80% of the time. Again, you want to swing for the fences. You want that crazy breakout. You're going after Dontavian Wicks or Luke Musgrave. If you just want like your Bobby Trees, it's Romeo Doubs. So that's how you go after that. There's nothing to say that like these guys are going to net, or Romeo Doubs is going to be anything more than a wide receiver 2. And that's the difference between like being able to track Puka Nacua and say like, hey, like wide receiver 2. Oh, now we get the news like 30 seconds before draft, like that, like this guy's going to be a wide receiver 1. Like, that theoretically could happen even with the Packers, because we get enough injury news, or someone gets like a surprise trade, a surprise cut, something along the lines of that. Now, moving on to other things that I am tracking, crazy breakouts. You already know about Zach Moss. He's going to be probably like the safer play. I'm leaning towards him after seeing how bad Chase Brown's vision was, but Chase Brown's got the league winning upside. Another guy, I figure throwing that dart, crazy breakout, is going to be Rico Dowdle. I haven't necessarily seen or heard anything that makes me think he's going to be the guy, but right now, like, who else in your league are you going to be throwing a dart at pick 130 or pick 156, whatever you're at, like their last round draft pick, to theoretically get the number 1 running back, the potential bell cow attached to a very good offense. So again, like, I pick your guy. I can tell the story behind it. Right now, like, would be maybe leaning in that direction. You pick right between Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, and this is going to be more of a coin flip. like something you can't predict when it comes to injuries. Maybe you get that guy. They're going within draftability. Devin Singletary is going to be going in within draftability. You guessed right, and he's the bell cow. A crazy breakout. Remember, these guys have been driven up in value because of being wrong with Kyron Williams. Tyrone Tracy, he's back running at practice, so it looked like he was going to be a season-ending guy. Well, right now we're still back on like potentially him being the crazy breakout where he's going, and he's going undrafted. 223 on ESPN, and then I think like I was looking at him, he's still like relatively down here. If I can go hunt him down, I'm not that interested in finding him right now. But anyway, like he would be another guy that I would be looking at, trying to hear about. And so whatever's craziness has gone on with him, from basically being the starting running back to being a season-ending injury to in an air cast to back at practice to running today, like I don't know, stuff like that happens. Guess right when it comes to the Chargers backfield right now. If you want to throw your dart, it's probably J.K. Dobbins, could be Gus Bus. Kamini Vidal doesn't seem like he's going to be the guy. I was actually hearing that like Jarrett Patterson may end up being the number 3 when it comes to Chargers. And if that's the case, like our dreams of Kamini Vidal being like a league winner, they're gone. So that really helps. Like, do you want league winning upside, J.K. Dobbins? Do you want a running back 2 at like pick 100? That's Gus Edwards. That's how easy it is. Crazy breakouts. Guessing right when it comes to the Broncos offense. I'm going to say it's going to be running back by committee. We're expecting like Samaje Perine getting cut. Audric Estime is still in the mix. If you want league winning upside, it's Jaleel McLaughlin. If you want like probably an ugly RB2, it's going to be like Javonte Williams. Now, a couple other guys I already talked about, like Chuba Hubbard, and that's why I looked him up ahead of time. Like he's going 131 on Fantasy Pros. If I can go back and find our Chuba Hubbard shares, he's going 131. He's moved up because of the news that we were already tracking that Jonathan Brooks is going to miss a certain amount of weeks in the season. So again, like crazy breakout. Probably not when it comes to Chuba Hubbard, but like you want your like that rock, that RB2 in your lineup for like 3 to 4 weeks is going to be Chuba Hubbard. You're swinging for the quote unquote crazy upside. It's going to be Jonathan Brooks. He would maybe in other league or other years wouldn't even be going draft or wouldn't even be drafted because of the news coming off the ACL. And this year he is. So again, like some of the other guys. Now I have all these guys. These are your handcuffs right now. If we hear anything, especially like injuries or trades, like these guys. So like you're looking at Khalil Shakur, Ray Davis, Blake Corum, Braylon Allen's another one. Like, if you're drafting your Breece Halls, yeah, you're definitely cuffing this year when it comes to Braylon Allen. So like, hearing certain news, one pick 130, pick 156, something along those lines, like, throwing one of these guys at the bottom of your cart and going like, well, if I get lucky with an injury, I win a league, something along those lines. Will Shipley's another one. Now, Trey Benson right now and Marshawn Lloyd, they're actually shouldn't be drafted as far as I'm concerned in your leagues. Now, Trey Benson is actually working behind DeMercado, and James Conner looks like he's going to be a bell cow this year. Marshawn Lloyd, he hurt his hamstring, and Josh Jacobs looked like he's going to be more of a league winner when it comes to those guys. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a certain appeal when it comes to lottery tickets. And then we can still tell some of the story, the Jalen Wright story, the same that led me when it comes to like Devin A-Chain. It's still generally there when it comes to your Jalen Wright shares. Now, to finish all this up, some of the deeper sleepers, that the crazy breakouts that I am tracking, like there's still a story where Michael Wilson ends up being the number 1 attached to the Cardinals. I hate to break that to people. When you talk about like the theoretical possibility that Marvin Harrison is going to be playing like the ZX position, lining up in the slot, that could happen. And who's going to be the guy that's going to benefit from everybody trying to take away Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison? It's going to be Michael Wilson. Not going to be surprising, but I also talk about the fact that I think he's going to be this year's Gabe Davis, and that's going to have like very limited fantasy appeal. If you don't think Ladd McConkey is going to be this year's Puka, you probably should be putting your money on Josh Palmer, and he's going like undrafted most of your leagues. I had him listed someplace. He's won 148 on ESPN. So again, like if you want those guys, Josh Palmer. Everybody's been talking about Josh Palmer. There's nothing to say that like there's going to be a guy that no one's talking about because everybody's looking for that guy. Luke McCaffrey says he played in the second half. I was tracking him early. I don't think it's going to necessarily happen early in the season. So when you look at some of the other guys that were looking like quote unquote crazy breakouts, and I should have listed him, Rashee Rice, I didn't like him coming out of college. He goes to the Chiefs. He doesn't start the season with the right usage. I can just bring him up so we can talk about our good Rashee Rice shares. So Rashee Rice does look like he may have a little bit of sneaky, crazy breakout in him, especially after the Hollywood Brown injury. But like Rashee Rice, a second round draft pick, I didn't like him as a player. Goes to the Chief, that's a good landing spot. Doesn't get the actual snap share, and then by the end of the season, he ends up being like, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as say like league winner, but yeah, he was really good. And the guy who drafted Rashee Rice because of the second round draft pick, like he probably threw him away, and then you could go pick him up. So again, it's not about like that type of crazy breakout. Some of these guys, they're probably not worth drafting, even though we're going to end up tracking them this year. So some of the other guys are out there. Like I could definitely see Malik Washington taking over number 3 for the Dolphins. I don't know if he necessarily has like crazy breakout, because I mean that means that he's going to jump the line on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe we can talk about him ending up being the number 2 there if Tyreek Hill takes that age-related step back. Johnny Wilson's running as the number 3 attached to the Eagles. Last time I heard, something I thought was going to happen. Casey Washington like went out and had a pretty good showing for the Falcons, and this is a guy that I thought would end up being the de facto number 2 when it comes to the Falcons. So like another guy I'm looking at. Again, I don't think he's going to win leagues. I don't even necessarily think he's going to be like fantasy relevant, but I am tracking all these guys. I already talked about like Jordan Whittington. Like this would maybe be the guy if he didn't go to a really bad situation. So, would I be surprised that someone gets cut or someone gets injured and then he's end up being the crazy breakout? Probably not. And then I already talked about like Rashee Rice. So I think that's about everybody that I talked about. There's Jalen Naylor again. I'm tracking all these guys when it comes to like being able to predict like this year's like crazy breakout. They've already been jacked up in price because everyone overreacted to having the number 2 running back and the number 4 wide receiver, and those guys went undrafted. And that's just generally not what people like in fantasy. Now we're trying to find all these guys that have the ability to win leagues, and they've already been pushed up into draftability for the most part. So being able to go out and find the guy that's going to have that crazy breakout, most of those guys' prices have already been driven up as an overreaction to be able to throw your darts at. The guys that haven't are going to be very limited. And not only that, like we're still waiting on the news because we're only week 2 of the preseason. We're still waiting on the news to be able to tell us like who the guy is. When I find out about it, I'll let you know. But until then, this is just a general breakdown of potential deep sleepers and breakouts.